Hello, my name is Rico, and this is my AGDQ 2020 submission for Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy, Crash to any percent. This is the only Insane Trilogy game out of the three that has not had its any percent shown at a GDQ yet. So I think it would be a really great opportunity to show it off and, just kind of finish the trifecta of all three. And this will be a replay of my PB that I got very recently, like a day or so ago. It's a good showcase of everything this run has to offer. So right off the bat, when you skip the beginning cutscene, it actually throws you into an intro level. But you can actually skip the intro level by going into the pause menu and just quitting into the warp room, and it just saves time over just doing the intro properly. So this first level that's coming up is Turtle Woods, and it's a very good showcase of all of the crazy movement tech that the game has to offer. So something I would pay attention to at the very beginning is how Crash's base movement speed when he slide spins is. So you notice that now Crash is going much faster than that base movement speed at the beginning of the level. This is what's known as the Hob Slide, and the way it works is that if Crash does a slide spin and then jumps and touches the ground before the spinning animation ends, he actually gets this massive speed boost that you can maintain for as long as you're able to keep a consistent slide spin chain going. So a lot of the time that's saved in this run is just from getting a hob slide and maintaining it for as long as you can, and then just getting like constant hob slides in as many spots as you can. Another movement type that's being made use of here is the glitch high jump, which is actually carried over from the original Crash games, where if you do a slide jump and then during the jump you spin, you actually get a bit of extra height, which let me jump over those large pits that normally you would have to fall into and fight a bunch of rats. So this is any percent, and the goal of the game is to collect all 25 crystals. There's one per level, and then beat the final boss, Dr. Neocortex. This next level is Snowgo, and at the very beginning there's going to be an invincibility. So you get invincibility in this game by collecting 3 of the masks out of mask crates. The first 2 just like grant you extra hits from enemies, but if you collect 3, then you can actually go invincible. And what I tried to do there, and unfortunately messed up, was I was going to abuse the scenery of that little ice crystal to start a hob slide, but unfortunately it didn't work out. It's only a couple seconds lost though. So the key about invincibility in Crash 2 is that invincibility boosts Crash's base running speed, but it doesn't actually boost his slide spin speed, and slide spinning is still a little bit faster than just normal running, even with the invincibility. So that was an unfortunate mistake there. I didn't catch the cycle I wanted to. So generally, you only want to grab invincibility when you need it to bypass either a lot of enemies, or if you want to bypass certain cycles that pause during invincibility. So generally, invincibility gets used a lot in the run, and it's mostly just if there's situations where you just want to maintain a longer hob slide chain that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, just because of the enemies or cycles that are along the way. That was a little bit shaky of a Snowgo. Warp 1 is actually fairly brutal in this category. It throws a lot at you, just in terms of movement and like small mistakes that could add up very quickly. But the rest of the run kind of tones down, at least in the middle part. And this level is HangEight. So this is the first of 3 river levels, and in the middle of these there's this jet board that Crash rides, and the movement for them is pretty straightforward. You just move forward, and then there's a button that lets you boost. So basically you just boost as much as you can. There's a timer that popped up in the bottom right corner there. That is for the timer gem. So this is one of the 2 levels in the game where if you reach the end of the level before that timer runs out, there's a special gem award at the end, and that's required for full completion in the game. It is actually actually skipped in any percent though, just because it wastes a lot of time to collect the gem, because you have to throw the gem up in the warp room and then it triggers a cutscene with one of the characters in the game who basically tells you, oh, you collected a gem, you should collect the rest of them because that will actually help you save the world. So it's actually much faster to just completely run around the gem. And there's a hop slide on the ending tunnel. A lot of hop slides are just triggered off of using scenery that is slightly elevated. The thing with hop slides is that you can't do them on flat ground because of the speed of the slide spin animation. So most of the time that gets saved is, or most of the time that you do for hop slides is just abusing scenery or elevated surfaces or hills. And basically knowing where you can do those, where you can do backups if you happen to drop a hop slide, and just things like that. This level is the pits. This will be another good showcase of how invincibility can help you maintain a hop slide for longer. So these birds cannot actually be spun in normal circumstances. You have to jump on them, which would obviously stop the hop slide chain. But with invincibility, you can just plow through them and keep the hop slide going, so it saves a lot of time. And then there's another use of the scenery. A lot of the scenery in this game just like juts out just a little bit that Crash can land on it, and that's where a lot of these hop slides are found. So the category looks pretty straightforward, and in many ways it is, but because of the many places where you can start hop slides, there's a lot of knowledge involved in just knowing where you can start them, where you can like use them as backups and things like that. So it makes for a very interesting category. The rest of this level is pretty straightforward. I attempted to get a hop slide on that little elevated platform where the gem would be if you were to break every box, but didn't get it. The thing with some hop slides is that for the ones that are particularly short, if you miss it, it's better to just keep going, because you wouldn't be saving any time trying to go for it again. Some of the particularly longer hop slides, it's better to try again if you mess it up, but in many cases it's better just move on if you miss one, especially the shorter ones at the end of the levels. So this is the first of 3 backwards chase levels. So Crash is going to be coming into the screen and he's going to be chased by a boulder. This kind of shows off how fast hop sliding is, because the boulder's supposed to be able to, like, for the most part, keep up with Crash, and he's just completely destroying it. And the speed of the hop slide also allowed for a couple of hole skips there, so we were able to just go completely over holes that you would normally have to jump over, and just kept the hop slide going for even longer. So it was a huge time save. And then here's using the hill to start a hop slide and then immediately turning around. Yeah, the rest of this level is pretty straightforward after that. And yeah, that's the first warp room. It's a lot to take in at the very beginning. There's just quite a lot going on in the first warp room. And then the second warp room kind of like is a bit more of a relaxed pace, and then around warp room 3 and 4 it starts to pick up again. So this is the first boss fight, Ripperoo. He is notoriously incredibly easy, and he's 100% an auto-scroller. There's really nothing you can do to speed him up. So like he follows the exact same pattern every time, and you just have to wait them out. So this is, during a marathon, this is the prime spot to fire off every single donation you possibly can, just because there really is nothing to talk about here. It's one of the only real breaks in the run. So one thing I will mention, just because there's nothing really else going on right now, is that the version that the game is played on is the PC version. And the reason for that is that the PC version is the only one that can run at 60 frames per second. All of the console versions are locked at 30. And not only does that make Crash move a little bit faster, for reasons that I don't think are really well understood, it also makes a lot of things easier. A lot of cycles are easier to catch, mostly because of like the increased movement speed. And then hob sliding is actually significantly easier, where on PS4, when it was initially discovered, it was considered a very difficult trick. And now, like, it's still considered an advanced strat, but it's not nearly as difficult as it was before. So that's a huge benefit in PC's favor. And hob sliding is also possible in more spots, likely again because of the 60 frames per second. So yeah, that was the first warp room. It goes by pretty quickly. And going into the second warp room. So the next level is Crash Crush, and this is the second of the chase levels. Initially, there wasn't too much to this level. It was a pretty straightforward one, aside from like a couple hob slides here and there. Recent developments have made it quite a bit more challenging. There's a lot more to it now than there was in the past. So, and there's another backwards hob slide. So these electric fences, you have to properly time sliding under, because if you spin while you're going under them, you get shocked. I attempted to get a hob slide on that rock, but it's kind of difficult and I just wasn't able to get it. And then you can actually bypass that fence by going to the side. There's a little gap you can go through, and it allowed me to get a hob slide up to that section. And then the last portion of this level is just maintaining two pretty long hob slides. So there's this first one up to the last checkpoint. And then there's this next one coming up, which can be carried to the end of the level. But it's pretty tricky because there's a narrow, like, curve coming up. So I didn't carry it all the way I wanted to. Sometimes the hob sliding can be very hard to control just because of how fast it goes. So through areas like that where you have to weave through a really narrow pass, it can be very difficult to maintain. So the next level is Barrett. This is the first bear level, and I suppose it qualifies as a vehicle level. In the sense that it's not a platforming level. And the way it works is that basically the polar bear moves forward automatically, so you control Crash's horizontal movement, and you can also charge for a short amount of time to get a speed boost. The charge is not infinite like it is in Crash 3 with the tiger. So the optimal movement here is to charge for as long as you can, and then before the charge runs out, do a jump, because when you land, you can just immediately start up another charge. It eliminates the cooldown of the charge. Otherwise, this level is pretty straightforward, and it's probably a good spot for like 1 or 2 more donations. And coming up next is Air Crash. This is the second river level. There's something neat that goes on at the end, but the beginning of it's pretty straightforward. Probably another good spot for donations. Most of Warp 2 is pretty low-key, so it would just be a good spot to fire off a lot of donations, especially because later in the run, it really picks up, so sometimes it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to do donations. So I'm actually going to skip this checkpoint here. And then get a hob slide right here, and then go up to the crystal, and then Death Abuse. So the reason for the Death Abuse there is that there's this weird platform off to the side here, and when you step on it, it actually triggers one of the 5 secret exits in the game. And this secret exit unlocks an alternate entrance to Snowgo, the second level, and it's how you unlock the red gem for 100% completion. Obviously, we don't need the red gem for any percent, but we still take the secret exit because it's much faster to grab the crystal, Death Abuse to the first checkpoint, and take the secret exit than it is to finish the entirety of Air Crash. I think it saves somewhere in the range of like 8 to 10 seconds, and it's a lot easier because the ending of Air Crash can actually be pretty challenging. So this is Snowbiz. It's the second snow level, and it's actually a pretty good opportunity to explain the ice physics, because that didn't really get explained in Snowgo. So the way ice works in this game is that when Crash does a slide on ice, if he goes neutral on all directional input during the slide, he actually maintains the slide momentum for longer than normal, and you can actually get really long slide spins and slide jumps like that, making use of just going neutral and doing a slide. And it is very important that I leave this level with 2 masks, because I will be making use of invincibility in the next level, which is the Eel Deal. So the Eel Deal is one of the 3 sewer levels in the game. In general, they tend to have very narrow passageways with a lot of enemies and hazards. So invincibility helps clear all of that. And it also allows us to maintain particularly long hob slides, because the sewer levels, by their design, have a lot of like elevated platforms that you can make use of if you were ever to drop a hob slide. And there's also this electric water that you're able to bypass. So basically the invincibility here is letting us tear through this entire section, because all of these enemies you wouldn't normally be able to spin into them, or it would be very awkward to time. And the hob slide just with invincibility just makes it trivial. So these spike bots can't actually be harmed at all. So, and I just happened to catch a really good cycle, so I didn't have to do any damage abuses here, which was very convenient. There's also one cycle at the very end that I'll basically almost always have to damage abuse just because of how it lines up. Waiting on it takes forever. It's pretty easy to lose a lot of time in this level if you just catch a bad cycle. But thankfully everything went, for the most part, pretty well in this case. And yeah, that's the second warp room. So we'll be coming up to the second boss fight now, which is the Komodo Bros. So something of note when I'm entering the boss fight is that I'm actually taking my time and not immediately rushing to the door. There's a glitch in this game where if you actually reach the boss portal before it spawns, you get locked out of it, and the only way you can fix it is by entering another level or by reloading the save state. So this boss fight is a lot more... I guess there's more to it than Ripperoo, which is not a very high bar. But the way this works is that you have to wait for the little guy to stop spinning around, and then you just have to hit him and knock him into the big guy. So basically, the time save here is just staying as close to him as possible without actually getting hit, and then hitting him in a way that gets him to the center as quickly as possible. Other than that, it's not too bad of a fight. So this will probably be another good spot for a few more donations. And with that, we will be going into Warp Room 3, and this is where things kind of just start to get pretty difficult, I would say. The order in which I do the levels actually depends on whether or not I leave the second Warp Room with a mask. If I hadn't, I probably would have started with plant food, because there's a potential chance for me to leave that with a mask. But because I did bring a mask into the Warp Room, I start with Unbearable, because there's a really long hob slide at the beginning of this level, but it involves sliding under an electric fence, and if you misspace it or mistime it, you can get hit and die, and it's a huge time loss. So I bring the mask in here, because if I accidentally hit that fence, then I can just take the hit and then do a backup strat. Unfortunately, I got caught in the hole skip there, but I was able to get the backup and keep the hob slide going. Unbearable is a really cool level because there's a lot of time to save with the hob slides, but it's also a very difficult level because with the amount of time there is to save, there's also a lot of time to lose. Also, the gimmick of this level is that instead of being chased by a boulder, you're getting chased by a giant bear. But that's purely like an aesthetic thing. So I tried to get a hob slide there, but didn't get it. This one's not too big though, so. And then to top off the end of this level, you actually ride Polar in the last section, so you are riding a bear while being chased by a bear. It's a pretty neat little section. It can be a little scary at times, especially the mask does not protect you from these fences for whatever reason, so if you take a hit, it's just an automatic death, and if you just happen to drop an input by mistake, then you just lose time that way. But yeah, that was Unbearable. For the most part, it went really well. Excuse me. So, this next level is Road to Ruin. In 100% and 102% speedruns, there's quite a lot going on in this level, just with the amount of skips there are in it. In any percent, it's a lot more straightforward. It's just like a very linear 2.5D level. So, the only thing that really is key here is leaving it ideally with 2 masks, so this would, again, be a pretty prime spot for donations. Can do some corner cuts here, but they're somewhat risky because if you mess them up at all and you die, then you skip checkpoints doing them, so it's a bigger time loss. And yep, that was Road to Ruin. Not too much going on in it in any percent, but the next level is Sewer later, and there's quite a lot going on in this one, which is kind of just a running theme with the sewer levels, is that they actually have quite a lot going on, and they're pretty heavily dependent on masks. I had a bit of trouble entering the door. So Sewer later introduces these new type of enemy. They're basically scientists hanging from the ceiling carrying giant flamethrowers. And you can generally go fast enough to bypass their hitboxes. The real important thing here is going to be the invincibility that's coming up. This level is filled to the brim with masks for damage abusing, but it's also just much better to just go through everything with invincibility because it just lets you bypass all of this. This is quite a lot of enemies. And then this level is one of the many in the game that has a forked path. You have to go down the left because it has a crystal, but it ends up being a dead end, so then you have to backtrack back out. And then the end of the level is to the right, obviously. Trying to get a hop slide there, but I accidentally jumped too high. As far as sewer relators go, generally, that wasn't too bad. That level can be very tricky and it's easy to lose a lot of time in. So the next level is Plant Food. This is going to be the last of the river levels, and it's also the second level that has a timer gem. So much like HangEight, we skip the gem at the end of the level just because it would waste time to grab it and throw it in the warp room. The beginning of this level is not too much. There's a bit of interesting stuff at the end, but the beginning's pretty straightforward, so it'd probably be a good spot for maybe like one donation. I did a damage abuse on the nitro there just because there's another mask coming up later in the level, and we'll be losing the masks after this level anyway because the next level will take them away from us. So this last section requires you have a mask just because there's no way to get past all of these plants without taking a hit. And it just saves time over, obviously, just going up and getting rid of all the plants. I'm pretty sure I got Nitro RNG'd there. So the Nitros have this neat little feature where they randomly bounce in the air. And sometimes they bounce really high. And if they bounce really high and you happen to be jumping above one, there's not really a lot you can do about it. Thankfully, it's only a prominent issue in like a handful of levels, and in that case, I could have jumped around it, but I had a mask, so. And this next level is Bear Down. This is the second and last of the like dedicated bear levels that are in this category. There isn't really too much going on here compared to the previous bear levels. Like, it's a trickier level, but overall the idea is basically the same. So again, pretty good spot for donations. Yeah, nothing too crazy going on there. And yeah, that's the third warp room. So coming up next is the third boss fight, which is with Tiny Tiger. There's a bit of RNG to this fight, but you can still, for the most part, manipulate what happens and minimize any potential time loss there is. So the way this boss fight works is that you're in this like 3x3 area of platforms, and Tiny will chase after you, and after a certain amount of time, some of the platforms glow red and start falling. And you have to trick Tiny into following you over a pit and falling. So the way the platforms fall is random, but it's out of like a predetermined set of patterns. So the way in which I'm moving around the area is basically my attempt to control how Tiny follows me and kind of just react as best as I can to the platforms that are starting to fall. Thankfully, I got a pretty good setup here. And now we will be going into Warp Room 4, and this is one of the most difficult warp rooms, if not the most difficult. There's quite a lot of pretty hard levels. I'd say, like, out of all of them, only one of them I wouldn't consider hard, which is the first one, Behaving. And even then, I wouldn't really classify it as easy either. Also, masks are pretty vital in this warp room, and in the next one, so from this point on, any accidental like damage or death can be pretty major. So this is red dirt in these levels, and you can actually dig under the dirt by just doing a regular spin. And the reason for that is because there are these beehives that have 5 bees chasing after you when you pass them, and normally you're supposed to have to use the beehives or use the dirt to get away from the bees. Unfortunately, I accidentally dug there. Digging is slow, so you don't want to, and the slide spin thankfully is fast enough to keep the bees away from you. Unfortunately, I accidentally dug there, and then the time it took to get out, I got hit by a bee, which makes this level a bit more terrifying. So you can actually get hob slides off of these beehives, but for some reason, these levels have this weird property where unless you're over red dirt, if you slide down onto the ground, it forces you into a normal spin. And with like really precise movement, you can bypass that, but it's extremely tricky. I'm not really sure what the cause of getting the normal spin instead of the slide spin is. It's just, it affects this level and its sister level, Digging It, which will be played later in the warp room. Otherwise, this level is pretty straightforward. Yeah, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen on the red dirt, so you can just get a hop slide there. And this next level is Ruination. It's Road to Ruin's evil cousin. It's a much trickier level, and there's definitely a lot more to it going on compared to the likes of Road to Ruin. There's a lot of really tricky platforming sections, a lot of maneuvering around fire cycles to not get hit, and the likes. So right off the bat, this level looks really similar to Road to Ruin, but it tries to trick you in that that formation actually has a nitro hiding behind it instead of a normal crate. So I'm actually going to stop to get this mask here, and I do that because there's a damage abuse coming up, and I unfortunately didn't take the mask out of Behaving. So basically, we'll be using this mask here to damage abuse through this fire so we don't have to wait on it. It also lines up this next fire cycle right here. This last section has some really tricky platforming, but thankfully it all goes really well. Yep, that was Ruination. Thankfully, it all went pretty alright. So the next level is Cold Hard Crash, and this is going to introduce the Death Route, which is, again, something that is seen often in 100%, but not really seen in any percent. The way it works is that if you reach the Death Route's platform without dying previously in the level, then you are able to take it, and then it is, you know, an alternate path, has some extra crates, might contain a gem, stuff for full completion. So normally they're not used in any percent. In the case of Cold Hard Crash, though, the Death Route actually cuts out the entire middle section of the level, so it's much faster to take that over just doing the level normally. So it's very crucial to not die here. And it will also be crucial to take an invincibility in the Death Route. It'll be important both for not getting hit in the Death Route and like going through a bunch of enemy cycles, but also for the sake of taking 2 masks into Hanging Out, because that contains one of the most important invincibilities. So there's a lot of ice in this Death Route, which we'll use to our advantage. So basically, the invincibility lets us bypass all of this, which would waste a lot of time otherwise. And then I slid into the wall there, just prevent myself from picking up that gem. And yeah, there was an entire middle section of the level that we just did not see at all, just because the Death Route skips all of it. Got stuck under the staircase there. Tried to get hop slides there and just wasn't working for whatever reason. Yep, that was Cold Hard Crash, and I left the level with 2 masks, so the next level will be Hanging Out. This level has a really important invincibility, but it also only has 1 mask in it, so it's very important that up to that point you don't take any accidental hits. And right at the beginning, we'll use a hob slide with the starting platform just to bypass an enemy with a flamethrower. And I do a bit of like a short hob slide here, but then I drop it just for the sake of being safe. Because like you'd save a couple seconds over doing hob slide there, but you would lose a lot of time for taking a hit. I'll just squeeze through these. So as you can see, the movement on hangrails is particularly slow. And that's where the invincibility is going to come in. So there's another really long hangrail section coming up, and the invincibility lets us instead hob slide across the bottom. And it just skips all of it. And then the rest of this level is pretty straightforward, so it's probably a good spot to squeeze in like maybe 1 donation. So the last level in this warp room is Digging It, and it's also arguably the hardest level in the warp room and one of the hardest levels in the run. It is also a very crucial level in terms of using invincibility, because it skips a lot of electric fence cycles that you would normally have to wait out. And there's a lot of really long hob slides you can get both at the beginning and the end of the level, and even in the middle. Like there's just hob slides all over this level. So again, here we use the beginning platform to start the hob slide. And start it up again on this hill. The way those like statues move is random, so you kind of just have to react to what they do. So they're moved in the direct path of where I was going, so I kind of just moved around it. So this invincibility is really important because it lets me start this hob slide and bypass all of these electric fences that you would normally have to wait out, which would also drop the hob slides. And you also, even then, you don't want to damage abuse through them. For some reason I dropped the hob slide there, I'm not sure what happened. I tried to get a hob slide there, but wasn't able to get it. So the reason that you don't, like, the invincibility is important aside from the hob slides, that you don't actually want to damage abuse through any like electric fences in this level, because you want to take 2 masks into the next boss fight and by extension into the final warp room. The final warp room is very, very heavy on mask usage, but is also very, very starved in terms of how many masks are actually available. And any accidental damage at this point would cause major reroutes. So yeah, this hob slide can be carried all the way to the end of the level. Fortunately, I went the wrong way, but you can get a backup on this beehive here. Yep, that was digging it. It's a very tricky level, but for the most part, it went pretty well. The only major blemish was just randomly dropping that one hob slide during the invincibility and then not being able to start it on the scenery. So this next boss fight is Engine, and it's like by far the boss fight with the most amount of things going on. He has 5 hit points, and each part of his robotic mech suit serves as a hit point, and you have to basically damage each piece a certain number of times. You have to hit the arms 10 times, I believe, and the shoulders 12 times. You can actually break 2 arms at the same time, but it's very, very tight in terms of like timing, and generally, for the most part, very few people actually get it. It does save like 15 seconds when it actually works out, though. In this scenario, it did not work out. So yeah, each of the shoulders has 12 hit points, I believe, somewhere in that range. And you can properly move to like snag as many hits as you can. Unfortunately, I mess it up a fair bit here. There's no way to break both shoulders at the same time, as far as we know, though, which is unfortunate. So the reason bringing masks is important in this boss fight is that there's actually a damage abuse at the very end. With the damage abuse, you're actually able to destroy that last cycle in one pass. Otherwise, you would have to jump out of the way, and then Engine will drop down and then pop up back on either the left or right. But which way he goes is random, and you just have to react to it, and it's really, really sketchy. So it saves time and eliminates RNG and makes the fight safer just to have that master damage abuse. And now we will be coming up into the final warp room. In terms of difficulty, I would say this is actually not nearly as bad as Warp Room 4. But it is very, very unforgiving just because the levels that need masks need them very badly. So it's pivotal to not have any accidental deaths or any accidental like damages. Yeah. So the first level in this warp room is Night Fight. It is the only nighttime level that we see in this run. And basically the gimmick is that you have these fireflies that light crashes away. Other than that, there is really not a lot going on. Those 2 hob slides at the beginning are more or less most of what you see. So this is a very prime spot to fire off a lot of donations. There really just is not a lot you can do in this level to speed it up, aside from just go through it normally. It looks like you'd be able to use a bunch of the scenery, but a lot of it is actually blocked off by invisible walls for some reason. So yeah, there really is just not too much going on in this level. Yep, that was Knife Fight, and left it with 2 masks. So that lets us go into the next level, Piston It Away. This level is filled to the brim with cycles that you would normally have to wait on, but with invincibility, they all stop moving. So the first invincibility in this level in particular is really important. The second one isn't as important, but it can save time if you get it. So those pistons stop moving for the entire duration that you have invincibility. Unless you just bypass this entire section. And there's a second invincibility coming up, I believe. I don't remember whether or not I get hit. No, I think I get it. Yeah, so this second invincibility doesn't save as much as the first one, but it's still pretty nice for just clearing this section. I got a bounce there, which I didn't want, which made me miss this cycle. And then here I try to get a damage abuse on this electrical tentacle bot. Unfortunately, I don't get it, which is I end up waiting on these last 2 cycles. Which cost me about 5 seconds, I believe. But it also let me go into Spaced Out next. Spaced Out has one of the hardest cycles to catch, but it saves a lot of time if you're able to do it correctly. And it requires 2 masks, and because normally you leave Piston It with 1, you do Piston It and then you clear out the other 2 levels and then hopefully don't take a hit, and then you do Spaced Out. But because I left Piston It with 2 masks, I'm able to just do Spaced Out now. So this level doesn't have an invincibility, but you can bypass a lot of these pistons with proper damage abuses. So the first damage abuse is there. Damage abusing on the electrical enemies actually causes your invincibility frames to last for a lot longer, and it just stops all of these cycles from moving, and then lets you just blaze through these nitros and this enemy here. So yeah, that was like the major time save of that cycle. And there's some stuff you can do at the end as well. So I tried to do the damage abuse there to catch this cycle, but I ended up into a crawl right after the damage abuse, so I didn't want to take a risk of getting stomped by that piston, so I just waited it out anyway. Which kind of eliminated the purpose of taking the damage, but I didn't really anticipate there being, like, forcing a crawl after getting the hit. So because we got spaced out of the way, these last 2 levels are pretty relaxing. So the last 2 levels are both jetpack levels, and the way they work is you ride a jetpack and you have control of like all of Crash's directions. You can go forward, backward, left, right, up, and down. Outside of that, the only really notable thing about them is that they have pretty awesome music, but they're very straightforward levels, so this would just, again, be a prime spot at the end of the run to fire off a lot of donations. There isn't too much about these levels aside from going straight forward. I guess the one thing I've noticed is that when you spin these scientists, if you do a neutral spin right afterwards, you actually get a bit of a boost for whatever reason. But again, not really too much going on here. Yep, so that was Pack Attack. The last level in the game is Rocket, which is another jetpack level, more of the same. Again, good spot to just fire off a bunch of donations. I decided to wait that enemy out just because you can catch him if you're fast enough, but if you don't, then you take a hit, and I was on pretty good pace, so I didn't want to risk it, and I just took the time loss. Tried to wait that guy out, and then I ended up taking the hit anyway. Yep, and that was the last level in the game. All that's left is the final boss, Dr. Neocortex. He's really not that impressive, honestly. So in the original Crash 2, Dr. Neocortex was notoriously a very easy boss fight. In the Insane Trilogy, they somehow made him even easier. So this is another instance where you're on the jetpack, and Cortex tries to fly away from you, and you just have to hit him 3 times. And there's a little like indicator above his head when he's actually in range to be hit. So you just wait for that to show up and you hit him. And you do that 3 times. And timing ends when we close out the menu that pops up for collecting the running shoes. So it'll be very, very soon. And time. So yeah, that was Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, Crash to any %. I do think it's a really cool category. It's pretty different from both like the other 2 any % in the Insane Trilogy, and it's even different from 100% in a lot of ways. So I do think it would be really cool. It would be a very entertaining run. And yeah, I hope you guys consider it. Yeah, so thanks for watching.